Hey adventurers! Today we're going to be talking about some of the best books to start reading when starting reading both high fantasy and low fantasy.
Yeah, these are mostly just some books that we feel are good entry points into these subgenres and are relatively easy and just fun books all around.
Most enjoyable, yeah.
Yeah. We will start off with high fantasy. So the first one on the high fantasy is the Redwall series. This series, I've been reading it all my life basically, and it's just a very fun. What did we say it was for? Middle grade, middle grade to young adult.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a very fun series. It follows animals, and I know Kate and there's a couple other people who, for some reason, and I'm not sure why, I don't know if they know why, dislike following talking animals for some reason. And so, if you're one of those people, the series may not be for you. But it's a very fun, very enjoyable series with lovable characters, strong, hopeful themes. They're usually pretty fast-paced and engaging reads. They're not super heavy on the world-building side of things, though if you read the entire series, there's a lot of world-building in the series. It's just, per book, it's not the focus, and the same goes with the magic system. It is a fantasy, so there is magic, but it's different, and it's an intrinsic part of the world, but not a heavy focus.
That's one thing I appreciated. I've only read one book out of the Redwall series, but I did appreciate the fact that since they were going fantastical and that the animals were talking, they didn't go overboard with the magic in the world. That was kind of a relief to me, so it wasn't too fantastical to be unbelievable. If that makes sense.
Makes sense. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about is The Hobbit. I love this book. I love Tolkien. This is arguably his easiest to read book that he's probably ever written, or anything that he's written, and it's one of my favorite books of all time, I'd say. Well, he originally wrote it for younger audiences, specifically his children, as a bedtime story. There you go. I feel like it can easily span all ages, and there's something in it for everybody.
It's definitely not just a children's book, but it's enjoyable both to children and adults.
Yes. This book, as with all of Tolkien's stuff, it is, these characters are very strong, very well written, very well thought out. They all have their own unique personality, and they're all very skilled in their own specific ways. The world is one of the most in-depth worlds, and in many ways whimsical, at least in this book.
Yeah,
Some
we
of the
see
other ones,
the more whimsical side in this book.
Yeah. The other books that take place on Middle-earth can be a lot more dark. But this book specifically has a lot of whimsy in it, and is just, it's a good introduction to his works and to his world. If you get hooked on this book, you're more likely to get hooked on the rest of his books. It's very interesting how he wrote this, because he wrote it as like a bedtime story. It's, each chapter, it's written very episodic in that each chapter has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and is a complete story arc within that one chapter. And so that you could tell one chapter before bed, and then the next night tell the next chapter. So that's why it's written the way it is. And it's a very interesting way of writing it, and I actually really enjoyed it this last read through. The themes in this book, they're very valuable themes.
And I feel like they're applicable to
but they're
real
also
day life.
They're applicable to everyday life, but they're understandable to young audiences. And so even though people may not be young when they're reading this, they can still take those themes and apply them to themselves. It is a soft magic system where the magic system is built into the world, much like Redwall, but there's a lot more of it than in Redwall. It's a very fun book. The last book or series on this list for high fantasy is the Mistborn series. Kate and I have both read this series, and we both really enjoyed it. Me more so, but I'm also more into high fantasy than she is. But this book is definitely for an older audience. It was originally written and marketed as adult fantasy, but it's also been remarketed as young adult fantasy, so it's kind of wishy-washy in between there. It's a great series. It's more of a heist storyline than a traditional hero's journey storyline, so it's very interesting in that way, very
It's
appealing.
refreshing for a high fantasy.
Yeah, very much so. The magic system is one of the greatest magic systems I've ever read. It's so interesting, it's so visual, and you can feel it and understand it. It's
a very visual magic system, yeah.
It's complex, and there's a lot to it, but the way he presents it is very simple and very easy to understand. One part at a time, you can understand that, and then he just builds from there. And it's very well done. The themes are very much more personal to the characters themselves rather than to you, but obviously, since you're the reader, you can still take things from them and learn from their mistakes, basically. The world is very believable, but very different. So it's almost like a post-apocalyptic world. Obviously, it's not Earth, it's its own world, but it's post-apocalyptic in that everything is dark, everything is gray, everything is ashen, and there's just there's not a whole lot of hope in the world itself, but as the back says, yet somehow hope survives. It's very interesting. I love this book so much.
So when starting reading fantasy, if it's not something you've experienced before, I would actually recommend to start out with would be to read the first book in the Narnia series. This is the whole conglomeration of books. Don't worry, it's not this thick. It's probably about that thick or so. Anyhow, the Narnia series, we actually had a discussion when writing this video whether or not this was low fantasy or high fantasy, and we did settle on low fantasy, and I do think it is, but it's one of those that's a nicer balance between the two, and so that's part of why I would start with it, because then you can get a taste which side you would prefer, the low or the high. This is a middle grade or young adult book, but it's another one similar to The Hobbit that's super enjoyable for older ages as well.
Yeah.
The characters in here are very real, which is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of lightness to this series, even though the story goal has a really dark aspect to it.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful world, probably one of my favorite fantasy worlds, on the high fantasy end, honestly.
Yeah.
Because that's where we see it more.
There's a lot of basis in like mythologies, which is very interesting.
So the story goal and the plot are a little bit more subtle in this first Narnia book, which I appreciate. It's definitely there. There is a story goal, but it's not as blatant and in your face. It's got some excellent, really, really deep themes that are very applicable to real life, and that's part of why I love this book so much, is because the themes are so powerful. And the magic system is a soft magic system. It is there, but I guess you could say it's unexplained in this book.
Yeah.
And it's not confusing. You don't see a whole lot of it.
I guess maybe we should distinguish a little bit between what a soft magic system and a hard magic system is. So a soft magic system is one that doesn't have rules that, it can, but there's not specific things limiting what the magic can do. Whereas a hard magic system is like, we'll take Mistborn for example. You consume the metal, and the metal gives you a specific power, and you can do specific things with that power. That's it. You can't really do things outside of that, those boundaries that are given.
And on the note of clarifying, maybe we should clarify what the difference between high and low fantasy is as well.
That's true.
So low fantasy is based out of the world that we know, the world that
Earth.
we see in Earth, essentially. And it's based out of that. And then high fantasy
is its own unique world. It may have similarities to our own, but it's its own thing. It has nothing to do with Earth itself.
Yeah.
That's
basically it. And so the reason that I would say start with low fantasy is because it's easier to grasp. Sometimes with the high fantasy books, it's so fantastical that it almost makes the story difficult to grasp because you're having a hard time grasping the world. Okay, moving on. That was a little drawn out.
But that's alright.
So the next book series, which is so much fun and really loved all around, is Harry Potter. And this is a middle grade book, although middle grade to young adult, really. It's very enjoyable, especially, I do think that the age range grows as the books progress.
Yep.
So, this would definitely be a younger audience, and then the older books I would recommend to a little bit older audience, so. The characters are very, very strong and just so lovable. There's so much about the characters that makes this series so incredible. And the world is appealing, and it's just so appealing. I love the world in this so much. It is a low fantasy, so it's based out of Earth. There's just a whole other side of it that the Muggles don't see. As far as the story goal, the overall arching series goal builds book by book, and within those books, the story goal varies, whether it's strong or weak. I think it really depends on the book, and that kind of that's my observation from it. So some specific books have a really strong story goal that I can really appreciate. Some of them are more a little jumbled up, little all over the place. But overall, the story goal is there.
Because of how these are written, they're not really an adventure story. They're more of there's an end goal that's like almost like a test, because they're at school, so everything's relating to tests in many ways, but they're a test that furthers the story goal of the entire series, without it necessarily being intentionally set by the instructors, but something that they still have to overcome.
Yeah, and Harry Potter also has pretty basic but strong themes, things like friendship, loyalty, that type of thing throughout the books. They are there.
Yes.
They're just more basic and not super complex. And
At least not in the earlier ones.
Yeah.
I think they get more complex as you continue through the series.
Yeah. And then the magic system is, the way we kind of chose to word it is classic. It draws a lot from what culture sees. I don't know how to word that. Classic magic.
Spells
Bippity
and
boppity
incantations,
boo.
exactly.
That's kind of where I'm going. It's classic in that sense.
You say a word and wave your wand, and whatever happens. So.
Turn into a pumpkin or something.
Or a frog or whatever.
Oh.
I don't know. Pumpkin or a frog?
How about a teacup?
Sure.
Okay.
That works too. Or you start floating.
And then the last book we wanted to talk about is Percy Jackson and the Olympians. This is a fun series. It is middle grade for sure, and it's definitely more enjoyable to a younger audience than it will be for an older audience.
Yes.
Just because of how it's written. It's written in a very simplistic way, in a very almost immature in some ways. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. It's just a light, very, very light tone to the book series. The characters in this book series have such impressive growth. It's amazing to see how much they grow from book 1 to book 7, or I actually think there's only 6 books.
5, 6, 5, I don't know. Anyways. To the end of the series.
Till the end of the series. It's really impressive how much they grow. And they're real. Like, you kind of feel like they're friends. They're your friends, those characters. The world is mythological. That's a pretty basic way to explain it. It's based off Greek mythology, and in this series, Greek mythology. The story and plotline is a little bit more subtle, for sure. It's there to grow the characters in a lot of ways, and I feel like the overall arching story goal, while there is one, and there is a plot line, I feel like it's more about the characters and their personal growth and what's going to happen to them than the actual storyline.
Yeah.
The themes are less noticeable. They're more minimal and common in some ways, like the Harry Potter series, except a lot more subtle than in the Harry Potter series. They're basic, the classic themes like friendship and loyalty. They're just a lot less prevalent. The magic system in the Percy Jackson series is really fun. There's some things about it that make you wish you were there, wish you could do that type of magic, which is so cool that they can, I wish I could do that type of thing with Percy Jackson. And that's one of the things that Rick Riordan really succeeded at when he wrote this series, is making that magic system so appealing and lovable.
And it is, so the characters are the children, or the children of the Greek and, the Greek gods. So they have, as such, they have the powers and abilities of the Greek gods many other times. If you're the son of Poseidon, you'll have water powers. You can breathe underwater, you can swim fast, things like that.
Talk to horses.
Talk to horses, that's true.
Although they're gonna be like, what? That's not water.
Anyways, so that's kind of how that magic system works, is it's based on who your parent was.
So if you are a younger reader and you're trying to get into fantasy, I would recommend starting with low fantasy to start with, just because they're a really good way to jump into it. That or The Hobbit. The Hobbit is a fun way. It's a fun story to follow.
Yes, The Hobbit is one of those ones that even though it is high fantasy, it feels so real and so engaging and immersive that you just kind of go with it and you're like, okay, this could be real.
Yeah. And if you're an older audience, I mean, same again, The Hobbit is just a really fantastic place to start either way. And then you can't go wrong with Narnia or Harry Potter.
You can't really go wrong with any of these series.
Right. These are all great entry points depending on what your tastes are and what you think you'll like best.
Yeah. I mean, so Mistborn, written by Brandon Sanderson, is both a great entry point into fantasy itself, but it's also a great entry point into Brandon Sanderson's worlds. His writing style is very different from most others, and his worlds are a lot more epic. But this is probably, and I haven't read all of his books yet, but I'd say it's probably his best entry into his Cosmere.
Yeah.
Same with The Hobbit. It's the best entry point into Tolkien that you can find. I mean, I would be fine just jumping in, but that's me. But I did read The Hobbit first anyways. And then, I mean, Redwall itself, a lot of people say the best book in the Redwall series to start with is Mossflower or Martin the Warrior, one of the two. But Redwall is technically the first one that was written and released, and the first one in the series in a way. Not necessarily chronologically, but it's also a good starting point.
Anyway, we hope this helped you find some books to help you branch into fantasy.
These different series aren't the best series in the world. I mean, maybe they are, depending on what you think. But they're our personal picks. They're subjective to us. And so if you don't agree with us, that's fine. Tell us what you would recommend for a starting point down in the comments down below.
Yeah. And if you are looking to start fantasy, I hope you found a book to jump into here, something that sounds like it's going to be appealing to you.
Yeah, we tried to give a little bit of a description about each of the books and series so that it wasn't just, oh, this is a good book, and that's all you get to learn about it.
So, yeah, thanks for watching, guys.
We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider liking it, and we will see you next time. Stay warm.